I think that the Me Too movement might have happened if Trump was not in office, if Clinton got elected, but it would not be happening to the degree that it is happening right now.
Well, Joanna, thank you for being here at AAI and being willing to talk about this brand new survey that Morning Consult produced, looking at white evangelical Protestants, their politics, and of course, Trump.
Yes.
Would love for you to tell us a little bit more about it.
Sure. So we had these conversations about religion and Trump, and especially after 2016, an election that no one really expected to go the way that it did.
Right.
We wanted some answers, especially in terms of why conservative Christians, why white evangelicals voted the way that they did. Many people predicted that because Trump did not fit the mold of who he did not fit the mold of who the traditional Republican candidate would be, especially for conservative Christians. Right. That group would kind of fall away. With each news item that came out about Trump, there was a predicted, this is the thing that's going to make white evangelicals, not
Head
show up.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
Exactly. And it turns out they didn't. 81% of white evangelicals.
Which is a high watermark for the past few elections, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, McCain did not do that well. Romney did not do that well among white evangelicals. So that was impressive by almost any standard.
Surprising, very, very surprising, given the track record of his whole campaign,
right.
And who he represented as a person to these groups. So we're 2 years in to Trump.
Feels like longer.
Yeah, it does feel like longer. But to say it's been a busy 2 years.
Yes.
There have been a lot of scandals involving Trump. Who can forget Stormy Daniels, for example? And we wanted to kind of figure out, okay, so we're 2 years in, about 2 years away from the election, 2020. Where are white evangelicals right now? Where do they stand? And what does it look like for the next election? What does it look like for the year after? And one of the things that we found in Morning Consult polling, not the one that we did with you guys, is that Trump's favorability has pretty much stayed the same throughout a number of scandals, including Stormy Daniels. With that in mind, you wrote a very good questionnaire, and I had some input. I had no input. I had some input on it.
You were there in spirit.
I was there. I helped with the logistics of it, where we were exploring, okay, so what are the social and cultural anxieties? What are the reasons evangelicals might stick with Trump? Or what are the reasons why evangelicals might stray from him? And essentially what we found 2 years in, I'd love to get your take on the data too, but kind of my take is that, this cultural and social anxiety that fueled Trump's win to the White House, that evangelicals pushed him into, is still existing. They don't necessarily think that his moral shortcomings, as probably they would phrase it, are reasons to abandon ship. Or reasons to leave the party, or reasons to not vote for him. One of the things that we found was that there's a 16-point difference between Republicans who wanted Trump at the top of the ticket versus white evangelicals. I believe it was 71 and 56%, something like that.
Yeah, 55.
55%, that's what it was.
Which is interesting, right? Like
yes.
That majority of white evangelicals, and you offered Trump, Mike Pence, who is of course the VP, or any other Republican, and still a majority of white evangelicals are like, nope, we want Trump.
And we we're going back and forth about Pence, Trump. I mean, Pence is so much more emblematic of the type of leader that white evangelicals would want, and yet there was only, I think, a 3 or 5.
Honesty, integrity, a family-oriented politician, and Trump is, of course, none of those things. And so, what is it? And I think one of the things that the poll reveals, and some of our conversations have been about, is that, he really does well among evangelicals who are have a high level of anxiety in regard to the changing cultural norms and mores, shifting attitudes around same-sex marriage and sexual morality more broadly. But also evangelicals who have sort of a more authoritarian disposition, or sort of more comfortable with that. We see his support a lot higher too. And then Emily Eakin's work has shown that high attending evangelicals are actually less supportive of Trump. But one of the interesting things is how many of those folks are actually going to abstain in 2020. I bet would be not that many.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think there was some other research mentioned at the panel about gender roles, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Favorability or support for Trump, or approval for Trump,
Yeah.
I believe, was a huge divide between those that want modern gender roles,
Right.
essentially not having, I would assume, kind of the woman be the homemaker, the man going out to earn money, or even those that heteronormative attitude, not having it be a man and a woman. I think it was around 50% of people had an approval rating of Trump, whereas people who wanted the more traditional roles, it was 100%. That, to me, is really revealing about who Trump represents as a person. Very masculine, very manly,
That's his whole persona,
yes.
right? And like sort of the tough guy, unapologetic image, sort of like a throwback sort of masculine trope in some ways. And if you look at where he's strongest, it is with white working class men.
Yeah.
And that's been sort of the backbone of his support. And you look at some of the folks who've been less certain or less supportive, even among constituencies that support him. So white evangelicals, right, like they strongly support him. But women, there's a significant gender gap. White evangelical women less likely to support him. If you looked at the mess around the putting the children in deportation centers, separating from the
family separation.
Children from their parents. It was a lot of white evangelical women actually who said, like, no, this is not okay. And we saw a really significant gender gap there.
Yeah, I would also argue that Republican women are more likely to adhere to these traditional gender roles and are used to seeing a man in charge. They're used to taking direction from a man. That's just natural. Maybe they don't know it consciously, but subconsciously that's, I think, very threaded within their ideology and their upbringing,
right.
Which is why Hillary Clinton, as an individual, as a strong woman who had her issues as a candidate, but was a female. I think that a lot of Republican women and white evangelical women were turned off to her because of the fact she was a woman, and they aren't used to seeing women in powerful roles. And you could even say you could say that about white evangelical women,
sure.
Because women are not allowed to ascend to certain positions that men are within denominations.
The most amazing thing about Trump is, well, one, we can't stop talking about him.
Yes.
But also I think he is the reason we're talking about so many of these issues, right? That for the entire Obama era, how much were we talking about gender discrimination, sexual assault, right? These were not national topics of conversation. The conversation of race in America is very different. And in some way, I think Trump is responsible for a lot of the types of conversations we're having right now.
I absolutely agree. I think that the Me Too movement might have happened if Trump was not in office, if Clinton got elected, but it would not be happening to the degree that it is happening right now. It's an interesting reaction.
Right.
But I think that there was a lot of frustration out of progressive women, maybe even more moderate women after the election. And the Me Too movement, it's not that it was a reaction to that.
I think it might have been on some level.
The height of it,
Yeah.
how big it got could be a reaction. You saw the women's rally, et cetera.
Right. And that was definitely the women's rallies that we've been seeing and that are still going on was an absolute reaction to what's happening in the White House.
100%, yeah.
Well, and looking ahead to 2020, really, there's a decent chance. I mean, none of the female candidates are polling that well at this point. I think that the top two are Biden and Bernie.
Yeah.
But Warren, I think, is still in double digits. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that Democrats nominate a woman. And that would be really interesting, right? To sort of see that.
They're calling her the marathoner.
Really?
Because she might have not peaked too soon, but called it too soon.
Yeah.
But she's kind of slow and steady. She's the turtle in this metaphor,
Yeah.
where everyone else is the hare, and she might actually be able to essentially outlast everyone because she is such a strong figure who I believe a lot of people can relate to in a way that they wouldn't be able to relate to Hillary Clinton. She's also Methodist and has been very outspoken about her faith. And I think that religion...
That's characterized a lot of the Democratic primary.
Yes.
I think people are pretty surprised about that.
Absolutely. I mean, what? A progressive person that's religious? Like a lot of people, that's I know, it's stumping a lot. And I think that almost everyone that's announced, kind of like bigger names that have announced, have made religion a key part of their announcement or made religion a key part of the early parts of their campaign. Cory Booker was in a church, I believe, in his video that announced his candidacy. Kamala Harris mentioned, I think, like one of the opening sentences when she said, I announced my, run for presidency was, with the grace of God. She's an extremely religious woman.
Yeah.
Warren, I think, was in a church just a few weeks ago in some campaign video. So religion is...
And of course, Mayor Pete, right?
Oh my gosh.
Who's gotten the lion's share of the attention, I think, on the terms of being religious and a Democrat. But I mean, obviously, a lot of the other candidates are as well.
And in the Midwest.
And it's a big contrast, right, between Trump, right, who, by his own admission doesn't attend very often, and some of these really progressive Democrats who are making religion sort of front and center about not just what they do, but who they are.
But even Pence, too. Pence and Buttigieg. I noticed you used Pete instead of
Mayor
Buttigieg.
Pete.
It is a very difficult name to wrap your tongue around, but he is challenging what I think the public calls, what the public thinks of when they think of Christianity. And maybe that's a good thing. Thinking about one topic and believing that if you don't follow this or do this, you don't fit within that very specific framework. Christianity, like there's a reason why theology exists. You can read the Bible and holy books in a variety of different ways, and he's kind of offering a new way for people to view that side of religion. It's not as if this is something new. It's just something that's kind of coming out of the woodwork in these interesting ways.
And it's I don't think it's any coincidence that he's young, right? He's like 37, 38.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a kind of generational divide even in the poll, right? We had that question where we asked folks if they wanted to keep sort of the traditional beliefs of their church or denomination, whether they want to adjust them or adapt totally new ones.
Yep.
And even among some of the most conservative traditions, you're seeing the younger folks saying, well, we'd actually be open to revisiting some of these ideas around particularly human sexuality.
It was adjust or adapt, right?
Yeah,
so it's kind of like there was three choices: preserve the current teachings, adjust them to fit kind of newer ideas, and then adapt completely new ones.
Right.
And I believe within white evangelicals, it was 2/3, preserve. All they wanted to do was preserve those teachings. And then within mainlines, I believe it was still a plurality that said preserve, but still a large chunk either said adjust or adapt. And we're seeing this kind of with things that are going on with the UMC right now.
Yeah. But among younger evangelicals, which we didn't break out in this poll, but the Pew Research Center did in a study they did, and there's a huge age divide where younger evangelicals are much less likely to say we need to preserve. And you're seeing this a little bit in the Mormon Church as well, where younger folks are really pressing to sort of revisit some of the teachings around homosexuality.
Yeah, but what's interesting is they're only around LGBT issues.
Yeah.
I mean, like I feel like immigration is also one of the larger issues, and so is healthcare, access to healthcare.
It's the biggest.
Yes, exactly. And like you could apply teachings about caring for the poor, caring for the other to those, but we're not necessarily seeing that as strongly as we're seeing it for LGBT issues and issues kind of surrounding that community, which I think is kind of interesting. I guess we did see it with kind of immigration. Yeah, I mean, kind of the family separation policies.
One of the things that I think is striking in Mayor Pete's, his approach is trying to sort of own these spaces that are particularly conservative, these ideas, right, about freedom, right? And when he talks about his marriage, it's about, I had the freedom to marry the person I loved, and freedom in faith, right? These are things, again, typically we think about conservatives or Republicans when we think of those ideas.
Yeah.
And he's sort of trying to reclaim that for the Democrats. And we'll see if he's successful, but it is kind of an interesting debate that we're going to have. And again, someone like that would be a really interesting foil to Donald Trump. And how would a debate like that even work, where we're talking about religious and character and moral values. Again, something that 10, 15 years ago would be weird coming out of a Democrat's mouth.
That's so interesting, imagining a debate between Buttigieg and Trump. I don't even know how that would go. He would start citing passages in the Bible, and Trump would not know what to do. And then what?
2 Corinthians.
Right, 2 Corinthians. And then what would white evangelical Protestants, how would they react to that? Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, I think their politics, I think, would rule the day.
Yeah.
There's that question about do people, when they evaluate Trump, look at their Bible and look at how consistent it is with some of the Bible verses, and that's not how people really come to these kind of decisions. So it's really more about does he wave the red flag? Does he wave does someone wave the blue flag if I'm a Democrat? And I think that for some of this stuff is top of mind.
Did you see my piece about most people thought it was inappropriate that Trump signed Bibles?
No.
Most people, including majorities of Republicans and including majorities, I think we just broke out Christians, thought it was inappropriate. And we were specific to say the cover of the Bible, which is different than signing an inscription kind of on the first page, which I know is very common, especially within Southern cultures. You give someone a Bible, you graduated, here's your Bible, congratulations. But he signed the cover, which is a little bit more rare.
Yeah, but they still like him and they're still going to vote for him.
They still like him and they're still going to vote for him. I'm not sure what he could do within this community. To lose favor with them. I honestly don't know.
I mean, well, according to Jerry Falwell Jr., president of Liberty University, nothing.
Oh, gosh, yes.
So, I mean, I think there's a lot of that, right? Where evangelical leaders are, in this current environment where they think they're getting their butts kicked culturally, whether it's marijuana legalization or same-sex marriage, being legal, changing attitudes on premarital sex. There's this view that, particularly the youths, are moving away from where they are. And so I think, because they're sort of feeling that kind of pressure in the sort of cultural environment, they are much more open to that stuff.
So that makes me wonder, because I know that we've talked about this before, about gauging identification within evangelical communities. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that there's not a shedding of the evangelical label, but fewer people, maybe there is, fewer young people are identifying as evangelical, but are still evangelical. Is that right? Or is that
There's been a lot of talk about sort of the reclamation of the Christian label and people sort of shedding evangelical identity because it's become sort of synonymous with the kind of support that Trump gets from the evangelical Christian community. I should say the white evangelical Christian community. But I haven't seen it anywhere in the data. I mean, white evangelical Protestants, in terms of their numbers, are pretty similar year over year. We're seeing a modest downtick, but overall, I don't think there's a lot of support for that.
Interesting.
All right, well, I think we've pretty much covered it. We solved all these problems. We figured everything out at this point.
For now, yes.
All right, well, hopefully we'll have to have you back again soon.
Yep.
All right.
Awesome.
Hey, everyone. That's the end of our discussion with Joanna Piacenza from Morning Consult. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw, remember to like the video or leave us a comment. And be sure to check out the rest of our videos and research from AEI.